Alright, so today we are looking at Lab 7. This is going to be a long one. This is going to be one of the bigger projects we do. So just understand that right off the bat. I am going to use the pre-baked code as often as I can. I'm going to try and keep this kind of brief as much as I can. So this project is going to be about uploading files, which is in itself not a terribly difficult task. However, the issue is that we're allowing users to upload files, and so with that, we kind of open ourselves up to a whole world of problems. And so a lot of the more difficult parts of this project are dealing with validation issues. And so that's going to be the kind of difficult part of things. So here are the specifications. There's also a new assignment for this week. The idea being that this one, you might have your hands full with it. Now the good news is, if you are smart about the way you do things here, you're going to build like a unit of code, a chunk of code, which can be used anytime you want to work with images or files. So if you're good about this and you're careful about it, kind of like the way I'm going to go about it, you're going to build a reusable piece of code, which is good. Kind of like when you build a Connect script for the first time, it might have given you some trouble, but once you got a good one together, you could reuse that thing. And so this is a little bit like that. So anyways, we're going to create a website, right? We've reached a part of the class where it's hard to just do a web page. Now we're in the website mode. So you're going to have a home page. I'm going to give you some code for that. If you want to do your own thing for a home page, go ahead. You can, but I'm trying to save you that because I think you're going to have your hands full with the programming part. I'm not asking your home page to have anything other than just the design of your page. Here's my home page, right? I give that to you. We'll talk about that. Pull that over. The other thing, so there's a page you're going to be inserting content. You know, you've done insert pages. You've done several of these. The difference is it's going to be very similar in most ways, but you're going to allow users to upload images as opposed to just, you know, putting in text. And so we'll have a look at that. I'm also going to talk a lot about sanitizing. That's going to be probably the most difficult part of this project. And lastly, we'll have a gallery where you display all those images. So we're not going to do a details page. I trimmed that out at the last minute because I decided that I just wanted to work with the uploading and displaying those images. So now that we've talked about that, let me show you a finished example. So this is your home page, more or less. Here's your display page, more or less. And here's your insert page, more or less. So notice this is where all the work's going to happen, really, is on the insert page. Not all of it, but most of it. Only difference is you got this kind of funky button right there. So that's the difference. So we're not going to look at that again. Instead, what we're going to do is, so I've given you a file to start with called lab7.php. So if you open it up, it looks like this. So what I'm going to do first is create those require files. I'm going to try and work quickly here, but I'll show you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to grab everything from the top ID, that's that top div. Cut that, create it in a new file, and I'm going to paste that, and I'm going to call this head.html. My file. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out where I want to put this. I guess I'll put it right here. And then let me grab the nav bar. So nav bar goes, actually let me replace that with require first before I kind of get too carried away here. So I'm going to say require head.html, and now I'm going to pull out my nav bar, cut that, create a new file, save as nav.html. I might as well just kind of steal this chunk of code because it's going to be real similar. Notice in the past I've been putting that H1 up above. This is probably a better way to do it, I think. Things are super indented. And that is called nav. And then the last part that I'll do is I'll just wick out that bottom part here. Pretty optional. But I kind of like to pull out everything that I can pull out because, like I said, we don't get too carried away with our footers in this class, but in reality you very well could have a pretty elaborate footer. Copy that, paste that, and now this page, which was called Lab 7, that's not an appropriate name for it. As you can see in the nav bar, that needs to be called index. So I'm going to take this thing, this just set of requires, I'm going to save that as index.php So all I did is I took that thing that was called Lab 7, I changed the name of it to Index, and I put requires in it. Look how nice and clean this is now. Let me, that is Shift Tab, if you're wondering how I untab stuff like that. I'm going to save that. Let me open it up in a browser, and we'll see how it turns out. I'm not sure it's perfect. I make mistakes, just like everyone else. That looks good. All right, so there's my index page, all done. Really, that was an exercise in creating requires, right? Notice how clean that is. And now, when it's time to create the next page in our project, which is, I'm going to say it's the insert page. I'll show you what the insert page is supposed to look like. Something like this. Oh yeah, wrong one. That one. Right, insert page is just a simple form on there, so that's kind of what we're shooting for. So I think a reasonable way to do this is to head over here to our index page. And this is why I always say design the index, put your requires in there first. Because literally what you can do is copy, so select all, copy, create a new page, paste it, and I'm just going to save this as, ooh, I don't know what it's called. I wish I could see that nav bar. I think it's called a, I can't switch right now. I think it's called a insert.php. I don't know what it's called. It needs to be called whatever it's called here. It's called insert. Okay, good guess. Right, it just has to correspond to the thing in the nav bar. And now this is that was kind of hacky, right? I took the index and I put it over here. This div is doing nothing for me. That was the content of the first page. This is what a skeleton looks like. If I save this, head back, head over here, click on insert, there's the page I just created. Right? So what I need to do now is I need to put a form on that page. And so let me just show you. It's going to look something like that. So let me just give you a minute to say, hey, make that form. I did labels, so I kind of made it a little bit pretty. You don't need to make it pretty. So you're going to need a text box for an image title, a drop down for a category. I'm doing Central Oregon images. I don't care. You could do whatever kind of picture-based project you want here. And I'll show you how that thing works. So why don't you start by making those two, and I'll meet you back here in a second with the form started, and we'll talk about some of the important attributes in a minute here. All right, so I just built up my entire form, and let's talk about every line of it. So there are some important things that you will miss. I talk about them in the lecture and such, but I don't know if you remember them or how much it matters. All right, so here's my form, right? This is a little bit more complicated than it has been in the past. So my action is this page, nothing interesting there. My method is post, right? All in previous examples we've always done get. You need to do post. So like I said earlier in the classes, post is better if you're doing like a password or something secure. Post is also 100% necessary if you're passing something like a file. So post is really non-negotiable. That has to be an attribute, and that could give you some trouble. And this right here, this enc type has to be here too. And so you've never had to deal with that before. So that's enc type equals multi-part / form - data. That is just something that you have to specify if you want the file to be passed. So the form, quite a bit different. It's kind of copy-pasty. All right, here's my title of my image, nothing interesting there. Notice I gave it a title of TTL, call it what you want to call it. And then for my category, that's a drop-down list. You definitely need to do a drop-down list for that. I called it cat, and I've got nature, people, and city. Depending on what you're having the users upload, you're going to change your categories. You can probably imagine what these are for. These are for searchability. Like some point down the road, you might want to search and see all the nature photographs or all the people photographs or all the city photographs. And if you make this a text box as opposed to an option select, it's going to not be very searchable. That probably should make sense at this point. And here is what the image looks like. So nothing too rocket science about this. Just input type equals file. That's it, right? That's what you got to do. Nothing more than that. And that's just the name, what you want to call it. I'm calling it IMG. You can call it whatever you want. Sometimes people call it pic or something. It is images that we're expecting the users to upload, but it's just a file, right? And that's going to be the root of all of our problems that we need to proactively address. But just understand that the kind of input is a file input. And I just call it image because it is an image in this example. So the only interesting parts are this part for the file and the stuff that goes into the form. That's your form. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to show you what the page looks like. And it looks like that, right? If you didn't use labels or, right, if you did a different form, well, your form's going to look different. I'm not too worried about it. I just decided to try and do a decent job with it. And I wrote CSS rules for all your labels and stuff, so if you want to use labels, go ahead. All right, so it works kind of like this. This is how it's supposed to work, but like I said, the validation is going to be pretty involved here. So there's a bunch of things that we need to check for. So let's head up to that part of the code. So this is going to be up here in the top before the head. I guess I could leave that head. I mean, I don't need like a PHP block on top of PHP block. I'm just going to have that head be the end of my first PHP block. And so I'm going to head up in here, and you've got some legitimate design choices. Basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put an if and an is set, because we've got to determine whether this form was submitted or not. Right? Same kind of thing we do all the time. Right, so there's going to be an is set. The question is, what are we looking for? So if you were guessing what to put here, you would probably guess like $_post, right? Probably. This makes sense. And then that thing is called image. Right? That seems like how it should work, but that's not how it works. So when you are passing around files, it's in this, so this is called a super global. This is all the post information. Oftentimes we look for all the get information. This array that we're looking at is called files, right? So when you're submitting files in a form, that is how you check for it. So that's checking to see whether a file was submitted. So your is set block is a little bit different. So that's kind of your starting point. Another perfectly legitimate starting point would be to have your require connect to database script up in here. I don't. Let me go get mine. So I paste it in my connect script. Notice I'm putting it outside of the is set. It's probably kind of wasteful thing to do there, but trust me, there's going to be so much going on inside of this block of code. This is a huge block of code, right? This is the basically process the image and insert all the stuff into the table part of the code. So I'm just putting this out here just to kind of simplify things a little bit, although it is perfectly reasonable to have it on the inside. It'd probably be a little more efficient, but I'm not terribly worried about efficiency because I'm just trying to make as clean of an example as I can make. So once I've got my connect script, I think probably one of the more valuable things I could show you, and I'll show you this in the weekly content, but I think it's one of the things that's worth showing you again. So you should be wondering what in the heck's in there, right? Like what is this file's image? What is in there? So the best way for me to show you what's in there probably is to call that var dump function. I don't know if it's the best way, but it's how I'm going to do it. $_files, square brackets, img. So that is going to show you what's in there. It's just a hacky intermediate step, but I think for a lot of people this makes a lot of sense. This will show you how, and you'll see it's going to be up in here above the body of the page, which is weird. So if I do a var dump tells you everything about it. So notice it's like, oh, it's an array. It's got 5 things in it. So technically what it is a multi-dimensional array. And you haven't seen those before, but I'll show you how to deal with it. So it's this thing called files image. And then there's something in there called name, which is a string, and sparkslake.jpg. Oh, I attached something. Sorry. Let me show you what I did. Whatever. I actually picked an image and submitted it. Sorry. I kind of didn't explain that part. But if you actually submit an image now, it'll fall into that is set, and we'll see this. So it's got something called a name. It's got something called a type. It's got something called a temp name. It's got something called an error code, and it's got something called a size. Now we're going to deal with most of those things in some way or another. So one of the important things that we are going to need at some point is this temp name. And if you look at that temp name, you can see what it is, kind of, sort of. So when you are moving a file, like you're going to be pointing to something which is probably stored locally, maybe on your C drive or something like that. There's going to be a little temporary copy of it, which is going to be stored somewhere, right? And it's ultimately our job to move that file from this weird temporary directory to a more permanent directory. And this is where that temporary copy is. And notice that's called TempName. So one of the things that I like to do first is, so I don't really care about that so much. I mean, I'll leave it fine. But what I like to do is create a little variable here. And I'll call it TempName equals $_files, square bracket, image. Now, remember I said this is a multi-dimensional array? So if you want to get that temp name, what you want to do is you want to write it just like that, just like we wrote it before, and then see how this thing is written like that, TMP underscore name. So if you want to get that out, you just another set of square brackets. Like that. That is now, so I've fetched that temp name, because trust me, we're going to need it later on. But for now, that's me grabbing the temporary name. And so this also brings me to another part. There's just so much stuff going on here that what I like to do is do some heavy debugging information. I really think that this is a good idea. So I'm going to put a, I'm going to create a little out variable, and I'm going to set it to nothing. And then I'm going to say, and I'm just going to keep building this up. So I'll say out equals, we'll say temp name is temp name. How do I spell that? And I'm going to put a line break on it like that. And so I'm just going to build up this big old output string, because there's going to be problems potentially, and the only way that you're ever going to figure out those problems is by doing stuff like that. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh this page, and so that junk will still be there. But now I'm going to start getting this little output message. Temp name, alright, what did I do wrong? I didn't mean, oh, that's what I did wrong. I really meant to not make that mistake, but I did make it. Alright, just showing you how this is going. I'm going to just tiptoe through the process, because if we were going to be lazy about things, things would go, oh, I need to output that somewhere. Alright, and so that is going to go down below the form. I guess if I'm going to do it below the form, I can do it in this PHP block down here. Let me put some white space at the bottom so I don't have to scroll down to the screen. So I'll do echo, I think that was called out. So now this will kind of just show us the results as they're happening. Because there's so many parts of this that could go potentially in a direction that we don't want them to go. That's definitely garbage up there in the long run, but for now, I'm going to leave it. You probably already now believe me that, yeah, this is going to be a long video. Alright, so there's my temporary name, which is kind of weird. You can see some kind of weirdness there because right, that image was called sparkslake.jpg when I uploaded it, but it got this temporary weird name. Alright, so we have, I've just showed you, at this point I've showed you how to deal with that multi-dimensional array. Sorry I'm going slow, but I think this is kind of one of the more critical parts of the project. So the next thing we're going to look at is up here in this weird looking multi-dimensional array is the error code, right? And so that is this thing right here, and you can kind of see it return to 0. So there are several error codes. So if PHP or right, your server can detect that there was some kind of an error with the file, like an error might be the image is too big, the name is wrong, has special characters in it, or something, right? There's all kinds of things that could generate an error. If it catches an error, then there's going to be something in here as an error code. You might notice how it's kind of like a this actually went fine, so I'll show you what the code looks like for this. It's kind of ugly. This is not a completely reliable way to check for things. So if you're adequate at reading this, you'd see it's returning a 0, which means it's good. If it's not a 0, then it means something went wrong. It's not adequate, but it's a start, and we always do check for that. So let me show you what the code looks like in a minute here. Alright, so I've added the code, and we'll just talk about what it is. So I added this block right here. Like I said, I'm going to expedite things as much as I can because this video is already getting long. This little idea of like block, 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 that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to keep adding a little bit more. So what I've done is I've checked the files super global at that image field. I'm looking for an error code. There's many ways to check for this. I've seen people just checking to see if it's equal to 0 because 0 is good. Anything above 0 is bad kind of stuff, but this is how I'm doing it. So equals upload underscore error, upload okay. So if it's okay, then there's no error code. Otherwise, error code is whatever the error code was, right? And so that's going to be like a 2 or a 3 or a 4. If you wanted to look into those, you could. I'll try and talk about it in the YouTube videos, but I can't say I'm honestly going to get that in there because I'm not sure. But basically, there are error codes which tell you something. Notice how I am generating output either way. I'll show you how this whole thing's going to fit together. I've also got this flag, which I'm setting to false, which I haven't made yet, so let me make that flag. And I'm going to start it off as true. So this flag is going to represent whether there's any problems or not. If there's a problem with anything, then that flag flips to false. So that's a problem, and it becomes false. The other thing, let's just get to it. I'm going to create a flag called debug, and I'm going to set that to true. I'll show you what I'm going to do with that. Right, so you notice how I'm generating these like error messages, whether it works or not. So that's debugging information. So see, I'll show you how I'm going to use this. See that flag right there? Remember this echo out? So instead of that, I'm going to say if debug, then echo out. You might think that looks like a weird if because there's no curly braces or anything, but that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. So you're saying if that thing's true, then do the output. So you see what I mean, how this works? I'm only going to display that output if the debug flag's on. So when I move this over to production mode, I just flip that flag to false, and then I don't see those error messages anymore. But this should be good. So anyways, I'm checking to see if it's that. If it is, no error code. Otherwise, that stuff. So I'm going to save that. Head over to the page. And so you'll notice I'll get a little bit more information down in here. No error code. That's good. You can kind of see it right there. So the error code, that's like the, so it's saying it's an integer of size 0, which it's nothing. That's why it's kind of showing up the way it shows. So far so good. So at this point we've kind of checked out the temp name. We've checked to see if PHP was able to grab an error code. Now the next thing that we're going to look is the file size. So I mean, we've got choices. There's no rational thing to do next, but see the size up there? The size is some big number, and so at some point we definitely have to set some real limits on that, right? We can't, trust me, if you let users upload a bunch of stuff, they could upload some giant stuff, right? Like what if someone uploaded a Blu-ray and just wasted all your server space? So we got to put some real limits on that, and I'll show you what that code block looks like. And so I just wrote that block of code. It's right here. Notice I'm putting it below the error code check. It usually makes me a little more comfortable to comment out my ending if block. So that's if error code. And this is going to be if size check. All right, so kind of similar pattern, right? Just one little block of code. I have a tendency to call those error. I need to call them out. I always change how I do things. So, all right, let's have a look at what I wrote. So if, right, we're looking at that same super global. This time we're looking at size. So if size is greater than, and I just made up some arbitrary number. So notice in my comments here, these are, it's like 1,000,000 is 1 megabyte. So this is like 2.5 megs. So if you're doing images, I don't know what I'm supposed to tell you for what's too big of a file size. That's something I did. I think that's going to accommodate a lot of images, but not all images. So I'm just checking to see if your file is bigger than about 2.5 megs. I'm going to say, sorry, your file is too large. Flip that flag to false, right? That's detecting an error. Otherwise, I'm going to say file size is okay. And see, essentially these are just if-else blocks, and I'm looking at these kind of obscure fields, and at this point you probably appreciate that var dump a little bit so you can see what I'm looking at. If you decide that that's too big or too small of a number, then you can change it, but you definitely should check for it, because otherwise you run the risk of having some bandwidth issues. So I'm going to save this, head on back to my page, and I will refresh it. Hopefully we see something like no file size error. File size okay. Right, this thing right here, that is like less than, so that image that I uploaded was less than half of a meg, so plenty good. All right, sorry, I had to take a drink there. And the next thing we're going to look at is the file type. So we've ensured that this thing has some kind of a, right, it passed this kind of generic error check. It isn't too gigantic. The next thing to look at is the type. So notice this, that's kind of right here. So it's this type field. Now the thing that I want to emphasize just a little bit is that this doesn't mean anything. Like literally, I think all this looks at is the end of the file. That file literally ended in JPG, so it figured it was an image JPEG. That is too easy to fool. Like just to kind of put it away, a different way. Imagine if I had like an executable, which was just a straight virus. I could change the file extension of that to JPG, right, or whatever. So this is really not a good way to check. You can check. That's just really, I mean, you might as well just be using a string function like .ends with or something. So there's a little bit better way of doing this, and I'll show you what that looks like. So PHP kind of has a better solution than using that thing, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you. So I'll show you what the code for this looks like. So I put in this block here. It looks really long, but I'm just talking about it's as much comments as it is code. So basically, this function here, this exif image type, This basically, you pass it the file, and it looks at the actual header of the file and tries to determine whether it's an image or not. So this is, like, as opposed to just looking at the file's extension, this looks at the actual contents of the file a little bit and tries to determine whether it's a file, so that's a better way to check. So it's literally just a call to this function. You just pass it that temp file name, right? So you're looking at the actual little copy of your file, which is stored locally in that weird directory. And either it's going to pass or it's going to fail. Oh, yes, there's an interesting thing on this one. So if your file's really small, it'll fail this. It's related to how the function works. So if it's a super small file, you'll fail. Like, so if you have just some tiny little pixel image that you're trying to upload, it will fail this potentially. So I'm going to save this. Let's have a look at the results. Right, this is all pretty anticlimactic. We haven't done anything yet. But we are making serious progress in validating the file. Oh, yeah, error, right? I have problems with that. So it's called out. I'm sorry. I just write that because I think of those as error messages and debugging. I make that mistake more often than I'd like. All right. So now I working on this. At some point we have to verify that the file's all good, and then we can move on. So it does look like an image. And now we're almost in business. So we've figured out that this thing's not gigantic. It does look like an image. No just kind of strange transmission errors. We've worked on, right, we kind of got the file name out. There's one more thing that we need to do to the file name before we really proceed. But at this point, we've kind of determined that this thing is potentially okay for us to accept. So let me show you some file cleaning before I get too carried away. So one of the things that needs to happen is, just because of how this process is going to end, we need to do a little bit of a maintenance before we go on to the next big part of it. I should have done this earlier, but I didn't do it earlier. So see this part up here, my line 13, when I created this temp name. What I should have done right around here is, sorry, I just copy and pasted that because I did. But basically this little line of code right here, what this will do is, so I created a variable called clean name, and I call this function called string replace. Basically what you're doing is you're taking all the blank spots and you're replacing them with underscores. We're going to need this later on, so I don't know where you want to put this. I think it makes sense to either put it up here when you're doing all that name stuff, which to me it kind of seems like the overhead of the process. Right, maybe, and I don't know, maybe I don't know whether that goes above that or not, but basically this little line of code right here will take all the spaces and it'll strip them out and replace them with underscores, because this is ultimately going to go to a Linux environment and spaces are not okay, so those spaces need to be replaced by underscores, and that thing is going to be called clean name. We're going to need that later. But now we're at the point where, so there's the big is set. We're still in the big is set, and we're going to create another little if block, so it's just going to be if. And so this if block is going to represent the situation where we have not detected any errors yet. And that is going to be the flag. So say if flag, and I can just say if flag, or I can say if flag is equal to true. Right, you'll notice every time we found an error, we flip that flag to false. And so if it's true, then that means we didn't have any errors. And let's actually proceed with the insert. So hard to believe that there's still a lot left, but there kind of is. And so this big old if here, this is, you know, if no errors. All right, so now we're going to deal with the actual inserting the thing into a database, and so that's going to be several more lines as well. So the first thing I did was I got the cat and the title. Remember those, right? Everything we've written has been all about that file. But do you remember back when we started this thing, there's a cat and there was a title. So let's get those, because we haven't gotten those yet, right? Because we don't even care about that information if the file is not an uploadable file. But this if block here represents, okay, time to actually do the work. Now just to be clear, you could skip all this stuff and kind of cut to here, which is the interesting part, potentially, depending on what you mean by interesting, but you're in a world of security concerns if you skip all this stuff. So at this point, I've done some checking. So also notice I'm doing the MySQLi real escape string, because this is stuff that's about to get plugged into a table, so I need to clean it up. The next part of this is kind of interesting. So, do you remember this clean name thing that I started up here? I don't know, I could... how about this? I'm going to cut that. Just right, I'm doing this right now. I'm going to take that down in here, because here's where it comes into play. You notice I haven't used it yet, right? Like, I created this variable, and I never used it. So let's just do it down here. That's probably a more logical place to put it. So that's the clean name. It's the name of the file. So it used to be called like sparkslake.jpg or something like that. This is referring to the original name of the file. I'll show you. Nothing's happening, so let me point that out again. Let me refresh. Nothing will happen, but so this is referring to this field right here where it says Sparkslake. So it's entirely possible that the file could have like a weird name with spaces in it. So that's what we're stripping out. And the next thing we need to do is address more file name stuff. So right at this point we're thinking about what is this file actually going to be called, because it has that weird little temporary name which is just too obscure. This is like a Unix safe file name, but here's the issue. If we allow users to upload files and 10 of them want to upload a file called cat.jpg, how do you think we're supposed to resolve that? Well, in Windows it would kind of concatenate on a set of parentheses and like a 1 and a 2 and a 3, stuff like that. But we want to resolve those conflicts ourselves. So basically what we want to do is we want to append some stuff to it. And probably the best thing you can do is, so we're going to respect the name that they gave it. If it was called cat.jpg, we're going to go cat, and then we're going to concatenate on a timestamp. Right? We've talked about timestamps before. If you put on a timestamp, then that means a million people can upload a file named cat, just so long as they don't upload it at the same second. We're not going to have any name conflicts, which is ultimately pretty important. So let me show you our strategy we're going to do for that. So I added these lines. So these 2 lines here, it's just a way to get a timestamp. And what I did is I took that timestamp. So I created this variable called new file name, and I'm going timestamp and then the clean name. So it's going to stick together the timestamp from the minute when you press the button and also the name, and it's going to spit it out, and I'll show you what that looks like. And so this is meant to resolve conflicts, because otherwise we'd have to yell at the user, hey, pick a new name, this has already been used, right? And so we don't really care about that. We're just gonna put a timestamp on it. So I'll save that, and this is actually going to produce some output. It'll add something down here. It'll show us what the new name looks like. Right, and so see, it's right 148 blah blah blah. Notice I'm going to refresh, and you'll notice that that'll be a different number. It won't end in 616. So that's how we're going to resolve name conflicts. So we're resolving it for the users. At this point, I don't think we need to look at this stuff anymore, because I've dealt with all those fields, right? We've talked about name now, we've talked about type, we've talked about temp name, we've talked about error, and we talked about size. So I've grown tired of line 10, so I'm going to cut it out. Right? I don't want to see that. I just don't. Alright, so now we've cleaned up the name. Now we're getting pretty close to the actual insert. So there's a function which is going to take care of exactly what we want it to take care of. And so this function, I'm going to paste it. It is that one. So this move uploaded file, this is a function which accepts the name of a file, right? This is that temporary directory, which you saw the path. It was an xampp path. And it's going to move it to a folder called uploads, and it's going to give it a file name of new file name. So that weird thing with the date on it. So one thing about this is a Boolean function. Oftentimes people wrap this in an if, right? Like if that, and so that would represent like a successful move. I'll put an else on it. And so I guess probably the only thing that makes sense is to put a not on it. And so let's just see if it didn't work, right? If it didn't work, then we'll do something with our error message, right? So we'll say like out dot equals failed copy, and the else will be out dot equals successful. I don't know how to spell success, which I don't know, you'll figure out pretty fast. Alright, so let's see how that worked. Actually, it's not going to work, and you're going to see that, so I guess let's point out why this doesn't work. So let me open up the thing. And blah blah blah. Right, I had some problems up here, and right, so it threw some warnings, and I also had the output down there. So the problem is, you probably could guess what it is. So I'm saying move this thing to a folder called uploads. Well, there is no folder called uploads, so it's your job to go in here and create the folder for uploads. Right? Now you have a chance at moving it. You're trying to move it to a folder which doesn't exist, and it probably makes sense as to why that doesn't work. So I refresh, and now my move's successful. Now, okay, so what it seems like I've done what I wanted to do, but I kind of haven't. So what I've done is I've moved this file to a folder. Even if I show you that folder now, you'll see there's something in there. But the question is, like you got to understand, I want to pull this up at some point. And so if I want to ever to be able to retrieve this information, well, that's going to need to be stored in a database. So let's look at that. And that's the last part of the insert. So the first thing I'm going to do is just that kind of cautious step, which I really like to do, which you guys all know is kind of tedious. I like to put the create table script in here and process it like this, just so you never find yourself in that situation where the table doesn't exist yet. So my table is called CO images. I got an image ID, I got a title, I got a cat, I got an image. This is the title of the image, that's the category of the image. This is going to be the path name to the image. So we don't store images in a table. Instead, what we do is we store the name of the file so we can retrieve it. I think you've seen me do something similar to that before in a previous video. Maybe you haven't. But basically all we're going to store is the path. And the path is going to be that thing, kind of sort of, is what we're going to stuff in our table. So that's my create. And then all we got to do now is the insert. And the insert is going to look like this, more or less. So insert into CO images. I want to insert a title, a cat, an image. Your results may vary depending on what your fields are called. So title, cat, and that new file name. Right. So we're just storing the path to the image. And then just kind of your standard stuff. And now I'm all done. So kind of interesting. I don't know if it's intuitive how this process works, but we're not storing the image in our database. Instead, all we're storing is a path to it. And then the actual storing of the image was kind of sort of handled by that function right there. And all that's left at this point is let's just kind of get a nice little error message in here, or not error message. So I'll say out dot equals successful image store, I guess. I don't know what to call it. And then I guess let's have an else here. So that else is going to represent some kind of a failure. I'm just making sure my curly braces match because I got a little scared there. So in my else, I'll just do something. I don't even fail. I don't even know how you get to this point. Because you could get to this point, so the only way you get to this point is if that flag wasn't true, in which case you should have caught the error earlier. I don't even know if we should have an else here, but hey, I guess I'm stuck with it because I did it. I can move it. All right, so I head on over here, and so this is actually going to store the image, so I'll say, put some actual stuff in here, and grab an image, and I'm going to submit it. And hopefully I get some good stuff, right? Successful image store, blah, 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 blah. I don't know if it worked. Let's see if it worked. Oh, yeah. That table's non-blank, so this isn't going to be real good. It's called CO images. There it is. I don't know how much this... Is that what I just did? Yeah, that's what I just did. It was a non-empty table in the first place, so I don't know how it was going to work. And now it looks like I'm uploading images. So that all I can tell you is that there are images in this folder, and I am storing the name of the image, and I think that's all I need to be able to pull it up. So that was quite an involved process, right? And you see what I mean by this isn't easy, and that's why I did a lab this week so I could walk you through every part of the solution. Because it's not the easiest thing to figure out for yourself, especially when I don't have a chance to kind of sit with you and help you figure out where it went wrong if it went wrong. I'm just trying to straighten out my curly braces. Sorry, you shouldn't have to watch this. All right, so the other thing to understand is if you think those debugging, At the point where your inserts are actually working, you probably don't want that debug flag on. So now I head back up to the top and I turn my debug flag to false. And now I don't see those debugging messages anymore. As you see, it's just there's so many mistakes that you can make in this process that I like to spit out output at every step in the process just so I can figure out whether I made a mistake or not early on. So now the last part of this is kind of a big part, but I think it'll make sense. And that is we want to display the results. So this display page needs to exist. Now, that doesn't exist at all. It's going to be a busted link right now. Let me show you what it's going to look like. So this is that example that I did earlier. This is my finished example. So my display page needs to do something like this. Oh, that didn't go so well. Don't know what's up with that. Let me refresh that. I don't know. We'll deal with it in a minute here. So that's kind of what we're shooting for. So back to my project I was working on. I think the most appropriate first step is to open up the index, copy that stuff, create a new document, paste it, and save as, I think it's called display, I think is what I need to call it. It needs to be called whatever it's called in my nav bar. I'm not staring at my nav bar right now, so I don't know. So it is called display, okay. And this is junk. So now we are free to talk about the contents of this page. So this page is going to be the page where we display all of our images. This might seem like I don't know if it seems like it's going to be mysterious or not. It's not. Basically all we're going to do is we're going to output a table. And you've done that before. So I'll do that in between these two blocks, so below my nav bar. Some parts of this are going to be static, like the table tag. So I'm going to open and close table tags. And then basically there's no header rows. If you think about like the way we've been displaying results in the past, we've had this header row, where it's like title, genre. On these, I think we're just going to spit out the images. You can do it however you want to do it, but we just kind of got to make a design choice right off the bat. So like in my example, I had 3 images per column. So if we want to do that, we've done this before. Now it's time to get into this is going to be a dynamic table, so it's going to be PHP. So just a block of PHP. Oops, that's not what I meant to write. And then you could also imagine that somewhere on this page we need to have some SQL. And so the SQL, I'll put that up in this block here. So let's just, first thing I need is my require script. So I'm going to steal that. And then I'm just going to write a simple chunk of SQL. This page I don't mind writing because it's going to be short. This is going to be select star from CO images. There's no criteria, right? If this was like only city pics or only people pics, then it'd be more complicated. But like I said, most queries we do in this class are pretty easy, like that. And then I need to process it, so I'll create something called result, and that's going to be my SQLi query. And I'm going to pass it the DBC and the SQL, or die, pad SQL. You definitely want to put the or die in there and put a helpful message just in case something goes wrong. At this point, I don't think there's any harm in debugging. That's all the SQL I need. There's just not more to it than that. Let me check out this page now. So display should be something like that. Okay, that looks positive. And so now this little PHP block, this is going to be a while, right? We've done this before, so it's going to be while row is equal to MySQLi fetch a sock, and the thing we're looking at is the result. And so that's good. Now we're just going to start drawing our table. Now remember this scheme, so we got to make a decision. How many columns do you want? I'm going to say 3 columns. You could do 4 columns. I kind of CSS'd it up for 3 columns, just so you know. So I don't know if you remember how this worked, but we did it with like an if and a mod. So say so I need a counter. So say I is equal to 0. If I mod 3 is equal to 0, then that means we want to echo out an opening tr, right? That means it's the beginning of a row. And then down here we'll have an if I mod 3 is equal to 2, then that means we're at the end of a row. So we'll echo out tr. You might be wondering, should these really be independent ifs, right? Could this be an else if? Sure, that's actually a more effective way of writing it. It's just like it just kind of violates that like template-y approach I like to take. I kind of like to think of the tr happening at the beginning and the tr closing at the end, but this is a perfectly reasonable way to approach it if you want. And then I need to increment my counter, which would be easy to miss. And then the thing that happens in between is we spit out a TD. Oh, so those are echoes. And then what we're going to echo out in that TD is going to be an image. src attribute equal to, let's fill it out in a minute. And the other thing you need to do is your alt text, right? You should always do that for an image. And so these two things are going to come from our database. You might notice that I'm not using the title, and I think that's suitable. I mean, I don't know. Actually, we're not using the categories, what we're not using. So for this, let's do the alt first. So for the alt in between those backticks, I'm going to do curly braces. And the thing I want to spit out is the row, and the field name is TTL. I think TTL is going to be sufficient for the alt attribute. The alt attribute is the text that gets displayed in the event that the image doesn't work out right. And for the source, this is going to be a little bit different. For this, it's kind of going to sort of be row TTL. Oh, sorry, not TTL. It's what is it called? I don't remember what it's called. I'm looking at my code here. It's called image. At this point, I kind of wish that I had this create script on this page, right? Like, should I have this on this page? So that's a good question, right? Like, should anyone be viewing the gallery if the table doesn't even exist yet? No, probably not. But if that table doesn't exist, then these queries are going to fail too. So I actually, if I have to make a choice, I actually would take that create table script and I would put that here. So let's just guarantee that the table exists before we query it, because otherwise you can have problems there. So it's fine to get no rows, I guess. And so this right here looks like this probably would work, but it's not going to work because remember, we have to link to that folder, and it was called that folder that we want is called uploads. And that should work the way we want it to work. Well, we'll have a look and see how it turns out. So let's refresh our page and see what we've got. Not too good. It's just, I don't know, line 33 is obviously a problem. TTL. That kind of tells me that, oh, it's called title. Yep, that makes sense. I have some problems here. I'm gonna get to the oh, I know what my problems are. I didn't think of that. This is a funny one, actually. So I'm gonna explain why it doesn't look right. Because it is kind of working right, but it's not really working right. All right, so those warnings can go away, but we're gonna have some problems. Floating stuff. Where does that come? This is just alt text, if you're wondering what in the heck that is. The other thing that I forgot to do, and let me show you real quick before we get too carried away with anything else. I wrote a little CSS rule to style our images, which I kind of forgot to apply. The CSS is up in the head. It's called gallery, so that gives a good width to our pictures. So here's my image, class equals gallery. That'll give it a width of 200, or whatever the heck you want to do to it. That's what mine does. Let me show you how that works, and you won't be too excited. We're gonna have some problems. Now, ultimately, the problem is, like, none of our links work. Now, do you remember, I saw the other part of it, so in my pre-baked example, remember how it turned out like this? So here's the deal. It's a weird one, but it's true. So these images were the ones I inserted previously, like before I started this video, and that's the image I inserted after the video. So how the heck does that work? So basically the problem is, I'll show you it because you might learn something from it. See those images right there? That one is stored, and that is stored in the uploads folder, which is in the same directory as my, right? Everything's, those paths I wrote are relative. Those other images are stored in a different file. those other images are stored in this folder. You see what I mean? So it's really weird to have. The problem is that they're both writing to the same table. I don't know how much that helps. I guess there's a couple ways I could fix that. But you see how there's an uploads folder there, and there's an uploads folder there. So I'm having weird path-related issues. Now another thing that I want to mention here, and so but these both have problems. These are like the old images, and these are the new images. It's kind of working how it's supposed to work. One of the interesting things here that people usually ask me is, you're not going to have valid tables. You're very rarely going to have valid tables, because more often than not, what's going to happen is you're going to open up a row, and it only closes when you've got 3 images in it. More often than not, like if a row only has 1 image in it, then you're going to have a hanging TR tag, right? It's never going to close, and that's not going to be valid HTML. But I usually just kind of let that fly, because if you want to try and address that problem, like imagine a situation like this, where you only have 1 image. What it's going to do is it's going to go in for the first one, it's going to open up a TR, it's going to spit out the TD, and then you're going to be done. It's never going to do a closing TR. So most of your rows, your last row is almost always going to be broken, and that's just something that I punt on. If you didn't punt on that, what you would have to do is, outside of this while, you'd have to check the value of I and just fill it in with empty TDs and a closing TR tag. I don't generally do that. So at this point, we've kind of created our gallery. It did go a little bit sideways on me just because of those pre-existing images, but I could clean those up if I felt like it, so I'll do that just to show you. I want a more satisfying ending than that. So I'm going to go clean up my table and show you what I mean. So here's my table. Basically, those are old images, and that's the new image. So if I just get rid of everything with an image ID less than 5, like I could write SQL and do this quickly. Ugh. Yeah, I'm going to write the SQL. That took too long. Yeah, I'm already not a fan of that method. So I'm just going to go SQL, go delete from CO images where image ID is less than 5. That's a fast way to wipe out everything. Sure, it breaks my other site, but I don't know. At least we can, now feel decent about this. So this thing's now no longer going to be weird. Well, it might be a little weird, but not as weird as it was. Right, and hey, right now it looks something like it's supposed to look. Let me insert another thing just to kind of let you know that it's working. So we'll do river 1, and we'll say that's the city. I don't know what I'm doing. We'll do that. I open, I submit, and I head over to the display. And you see now my table's doing what it's doing. Right, it's weird because that row never ends. And you can see that if you view the page source. If you wanted to look at it, right? The row never ends. It just opens up a TR here, never closes the TR, and so things look a little weird. And that's generally, it's probably not worth fixing right now. You could fix it if you were making a production site, but for this, I probably don't want to do it. So sorry, that last like 5 minutes was kind of weird. I don't know if you ever really gathered what the problem was, but basically, remember this was my original site. My original site's completely broken now because, well, I guess I don't know what it does. Nothing. I don't. Oh, so it's trying to display those 2 images, but it can't find them because it's looking in its local images or uploads folder for files, which it doesn't have. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying or not, but I guess I should have just written it to a different table, and I didn't. So that was the image upload project. As you see, this video was nearly an hour. I talked a lot, but I also kind of used a lot of pre-baked code. So take your time on this. Now the really nice thing about, and one of the reasons I tried to do a real clean job of uploading images, and I put these nice debugging messages in here, is think about this. You could take this chunk of code, like from there to there, and you could just, right, you could take that and turn it into a require and call it, upload.php, and you could use this every time that you're uploading a file. Right? I mean, this is very neutral, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing that is highly reusable, and so I like to take my time with it and do a good job with it, just so now you've got an image uploader built, and the next time you want to create a project where a user uploads images, you can use this. So hopefully this went well. Right, this is the only thing you're turning in for the week, so take your time, and if you need help on a Friday session, I'd be happy to help you out. Thanks for watching.